Lucy knew, of course, that childbirth was not the most pleasant procedure in life, but she had never given much thought to the fact that it was so painful and almost unbearable. Other people give birth. How could she be worse? But such pain as she had felt in labor, she had never experienced, and if there was a chance to turn back time, she would definitely give up the happiness of motherhood. "I hate you." She screamed in the delivery room as the labor began. She was screaming into nowhere, but the face of her husband and the baby's father was in front of her eyes. John was at home at the time, probably watching TV and drinking beer, a picture Lucy imagined very clearly. "You will hate it home, and now we are giving birth," said the doctor in a white coat strictly. "You are about to have a baby, and you hear unpleasant phrases thrown around." "I hate him," Lucy shouted again and howled as if she were not a woman but a she-wolf. If he only knew how much it hurts. "Oh, I know," the doctor said again in a stern voice, and slapped Lucy's knees. "Push and don't yell." Lying in the ward, a couple of hours later and coming to her senses, she thought about the fact that she would never dare to become a mother again. Of course, the pain was in the past, but the memories of the agony, from which now the whole body ached and whimpered, did not let Lucy go for a moment. When a gurney with another new mother was brought into her room, Lucy was almost coming to her senses. Her newborn daughter was taken to the pediatric ward, from where she was promised to be brought in for feeding. Her breasts were aching too, and the thought of having to feed her baby with them made her uncomfortable. Thank God, she had shot off. Her roommate exhaled and stared at the ceiling. Lucy looked at her in surprise but didn't say anything. She groaned, stretched out on the bed, and tried to sit up. Lucy had the feeling that this young woman had not given birth at all, but as if she had gone to get bread and just twisted her leg while walking back up the dark stairs. "Are you all right?" She turned to Lucy, and now Lucy looked curiously at her bunkmate, who had unwittingly turned out to be her interlocutor. "Is this your first time?" "First time," Lucy answered reluctantly and turned away. If at first she thought the woman looked about 25 at most, now it was obvious that she was at least 30. "Oh, and my first time was 12 years ago. Now my daughter is that age, and I'm getting ready to be a grandmother. She's going to be early, I guess, just like me. Did you have a son or a daughter?" "A daughter," Lucy answered briefly, letting her neighbor know that she didn't want to continue the conversation, but she didn't stop talking for a minute. "I have a daughter too, and now I have a son. I had another child, but he died in childbirth. Here, you should listen to doctors, not pretend that you know everything. And I was wrong to rely on nature. I should have relied more on doctors and their experience." Lucy was silent, but she kept talking and talking. She called herself Katie, said she was 29, and at 17 she had become a mother for the first time. She told her that she had been married, except that her husband liked to drink and raise his hand to her and cheated on her, even sleeping with Katie's own sister. About the fact that the second child was born and died because her husband beat her and she didn't want him. Lucy didn't understand where this Kathy had so much strength and energy after 8 hours of labor, and especially the desire to talk nonstop. For a moment, Lucy had the feeling that she had been silent for the whole 9 months of her pregnancy, and now she could afford to talk. And information was pouring out of her like a cornucopia. "I had this little boy with a married man, but he doesn't love his wife. He wants to leave her, but he doesn't have the courage. He's a wimp, like all of them. In general, it's a mistake to call men the strong sex. They are all weaklings." Probably, said Lucy, who only had time to insert words like maybe, yeah, definitely, or I'm not sure. Katie, who was a terrible talker, commented nonstop on everything else. When they were both brought in to feed their babies, Kathy helped Lucy understand how to put a newborn baby to the breast in the first place. "You can't beat experience." Kathy giggled and guided the baby to Lucy's breast. "I tried, honestly, it didn't work." "Oh, are you drinking?" Was the first question Lucy dared to ask Katie, and she shook her head. "I used to. My husband drank, and I drank with him. To be honest, it was impossible to live sober with him. I wanted to get drunk and forget myself all the time." "You left him." "He died. He got drunk once on New Year's Eve, and then fell asleep in a snowdrift, and by morning his neighbors found him already frozen. I should have cried then, but I felt so relieved that I felt sick. The next day, when both new mothers had already had time to sleep, eat breakfast, and feed their children twice, the room became. It was unusual for Lucy to hear the silence, because in the last 24 hours Katie had been talking so much that the walls were shaking from her loud chatter, and the women in labor were curious to see the one who laughed and chattered nonstop. Lucy turned her head toward the bed where Katie was lying and noticed that she had fallen asleep. Maybe Katie was pretending to sleep, but the resulting silence in the room made Lucy think hard about her life. Are John and I any good? She thought, and then sighed. He hadn't even come to the maternity ward to congratulate her on the birth of her daughter. Probably drunk and sleeping, or celebrating his daughter's birth with friends. That was also quite his style. The birth of his daughter coincided with the May holidays, and therefore the number of occasions for libations doubled, if not tripled. I love you, were the words of the once ardent lover John as he addressed Lucy on the doorstep of her parents' house. Really? She snorted then and rubbed the ring with her finger, a gift from her other suitor who had been seeking her attention for some time. Get it, finally. John nodded sadly and took a deep breath. His rivalry with Harry, who was Lucy's second suitor, had resulted in him now standing in front of Lucy and swearing his love to her. Oh, why did Harry come to see you? Like to propose? Harry had indeed come to Lucy's house the day before to say goodbye to her before he left for the army. And Lucy had laughed at him for a long time as she listened to his uncertain and childish declarations of affection. Harry promised her he would come back and be there for her, and he demanded that she be faithful and answer his letters regularly. Lucy had promised him nothing, but she couldn't take advantage of Harry's evening visit. John was supposed to go on duty with his friend too, but he had been excused from combat duty by his grandparents. Lucy stretched out her hand and showed the ring, which John ogled, jaw clenched. He was jealous. He didn't want Lucy to get to someone else, and she laughed and looked bravely into John's face. Did you see that? He nodded, and his face flushed with thick color. What did you say to him? That you would wait and be faithful. I promised to think about it and to answer him in a letter, Lucy said, feeling light inside and close to the main thing. Everything happened as she wanted it to. John proposed, and 2 months later they were married. John's parents and grandparents weren't happy about their marriage, but John was determined to get married to prove to everyone that he was better and cooler than Harry. He'd probably never really loved Lucy, but now that he was her husband, there was no turning back. Her first pregnancy had ended in a miscarriage. Lucy had suffered from it, and John was glad that the danger of a child hanging around his neck was over. He took a job at the mayor's office, poring over paperwork and boredom, while Lucy worked at the dairy, less money than John, but a real job. The young couple lived in a separate apartment, obtained in some special way by John's parents. He had his own car, a gift from his grandfather, and life seemed quite good and successful. Lucy watched every step of her husband, checked him for infidelity and possible forbidden communication with other women, but then loosened the bonds because she thought that John was not interested in it at all. He was only interested in cars. Work in the mayor's office was disgusting to him. The young man wanted to do something related to cars, but there were no such opportunities. 2 years after John and Lucy were married, his grandfather died, and then his grandmother. John's father drank, lost his job, and soon died of a blood clot. John's mother moved to another city where she tried to start her life over. I'm going to work for Harry, John once announced to Lucy, and she rounded her eyes in surprise. I'm tired of wiping my pants at City Hall. I'm going to work at Harry's auto shop. I'm going to work on cars like I've wanted to for a long time. You're crazy. Lucy was screaming. You've got a good job. You want to lose it? Are you out of your mind? Good for who? John shouted, and with that shout he frightened Lucy. Never before had he allowed himself to behave like this in the company of his wife. I've been sitting in this chair for years, poring over papers and spitting at the ceiling because I'm bored. I hate this job, this position, this need to go to a boring place and sit there pants down. Now that there's an opportunity for cars, I can't let it go. and I won't let you dictate my terms." Lucy cried with despair because she knew she couldn't change her husband's mind. Harry, who was happy to have his childhood friend on his team, was also rubbing his hands together. A couple months later, John came home from work drunk for the first time. "Now, how are you behaving?" Lucy asked in horror as she remembered how her father-in-law had behaved shortly before his death. He had been drinking non-stop, imbibing everything he could get his hands on, and now John was following in his footsteps. "Oh, you lied to me." "What are you talking about?" Lucy felt the blood drain from her face. "About Harry giving you a ring. He didn't give you anything, and he didn't ask you to marry him. Now tell me what the hell you've been telling me." Lucy remained silent, realizing that her marriage to John was falling apart. By then, she wasn't sure she wanted to keep the marriage alive, or that the relationship was even worth saving and shaking on, but it was frustrating. It was also a shame because the ill-fated ring that Lucy had shown John the day he'd proposed to her, she'd bought herself. She had bought it on purpose to tease John, to encourage him to propose. It seemed like the marriage was over when it suddenly became clear that Lucy was pregnant. By then, she and John had become almost strangers to each other, and Lucy's first impulse was to have an abortion. She was about to decide to do it, and then John found out that she was pregnant, and he forbade her to terminate the pregnancy, although he wasn't jumping up and down with joy. "What are you doing up?" Lucy was distracted from her sad thoughts by Katie's voice. "They're going to let me go home now, and I won't be able to sleep. Get some sleep while you can." "Oh, I don't want to," Lucy said quietly and sighed heavily. "Yeah, it happens," Katie said, and sat down on the bed. "It's the law of meanness. You're thinking about your husband, aren't you?" Lucy glanced unhappily at her neighbor, and then decided that there was no point in lying to this random interlocutor with whom they would part in a couple of days and never see each other again. "I think so." What do you think?" Lucy was silent for a moment, and then answered sharply. "I think I'm a fool. I gave birth to a man I don't love, who doesn't love me. No one wants that child. She's already doomed to be miserable." Katie shook her head. "You're really not very smart, just as you say yourself. Children, of course, are not a gift, not the flowers of life, as they like to convince us. But without them, there's no sense in life, no meaning in it. You will live like this. You will smoke the sky, but next to children, there is a sense. To work with your paws, to move, to think with your head. What's the meaning of your life?" Lucy asked Katie with bitterness in her voice. "To live, honey, just to live. When I lost my second child, I thought I was going to climb the walls. I howled like a dog, grabbed a razor or two. I thought I'd just die and be done with it. If it wasn't for Betty, there'd be no point in going on living. But I got through it, made myself look at life differently, and it even seemed that my husband wasn't such a bastard." Lucy was silent, but she didn't sleep much that night. She rolled from side to side, listening to Kathy mumble something to her son, who was brought to her by the nurses for night feedings. Lucy thought about her daughter, whose name she couldn't think of yet, and then decided that John would name the baby whatever he wanted. Katie was discharged early, and Lucy was kept in the hospital because of some complications. By this time, John had never shown up at the maternity hospital, and Lucy was not expecting him. "Be happy, Lucy." Kathy said goodbye, holding her son wrapped in a blanket to her chest. "May your life work out, may your husband come to his senses, and may you realize that a child can change everything for the better. In general, everything that is done in life is for the best. Mine, at home, I guess. He's got his own family, his own worries. I had that baby for me, not for him. He doesn't even want to know about it, and he's right. I'm not going to let him see his son anyway." "Do you think you've made the right decision?" Lucy asked another question, but Katie just grinned sadly and patted her almost ex-roommate on the shoulder. A few days later, it became clear that Lucy's health problems were more serious than she had realized. "We are discharging the baby," said the Dr. Lucy, and she bulged her eyes. "And you, my dear, still remain under our supervision and transferred to gynecology." "But what about the baby? What about her without me?" "Got a daddy, yes. He'll manage, he'll feed the formula, change the diapers himself. We'll give him a sick day and you'll stay here and get checked out. We don't keep anyone here for nothing. If we decide you need to stay here, that's the way it should be." Lucy was crying, looking into the small face of her defenseless daughter, realizing that something terrible had happened to her, on which her life and the life and health of her daughter depended. From the maternity hospital, the girl was taken by John, who came with her mother, who had specially appeared in the city for such a case, and Lucy stayed in the hospital, not yet understanding what exactly was happening to her. A week later, there was one operation, then another, and the doctors didn't say or explain anything. There was no talk of discharge, and John came to the hospital only twice, and that only at Lucy's request. "Everything is bad," said the doctor a month after Lucy came to the hospital with contractions. "You should be transferred to the regional center, because at our level, we have done everything we can." Lucy was in a panic. Some terrible diagnosis, announced by the attending physician, was like the end of the world. The child stayed with her husband and mother-in-law. Daughter Lucy never saw again, knew only that John named her Mady in honor of her grandmother. Lucy struggled to fight an illness that was much stronger than her own. "You have a visitor," the nurse said. As she entered the room, Lucy shared with various women. Some came and went, others were discharged, and Lucy remained the longest patient in the hospital. She was sure John had come in, but when she stepped out into the hallway, she saw Kathy. The woman was standing against the wall, a bag in her hand. Next to her on the bench where visitors and patients sat was a cradle with a baby in it. "Hi," Lucy hugged Katie, surprised by her arrival. "How did you know I was still here?" "Mo say hello to Madi," Katie said and nodded toward the cradle. Lucy looked at the woman incomprehensibly, then shifted her gaze to the cradle. "Mady, isn't that your son?" "It's your daughter. Brought her to you because John wouldn't realize that's the way to do it." Lucy was confused and approached the cradle. Her mind was racing with thoughts, but the painkillers made it almost impossible to get them together. Two blue eyes looked up at her. It was her daughter, who had just turned a month old. Taking the girl in her arms, Lucy took a seat on the bench and Katie sat down beside her. "There's a lot you don't know, but you should know," Kathy said. "You should have known a long time ago, but no one had the courage to tell the truth. John is the father of my son, your husband John." Lucy looked at Kathy with blank eyes as she tried to comprehend what the woman was telling her. Her thoughts were scattered and confused, but one thing was clear. Katie had brought her daughter to the hospital for a reason, so she had something to do with her family. "I'd met Stipa over 2 years ago, right when he'd gotten a job at Harry's car service. My husband had bought a used car then, and it was breaking down all the time, and I was driving it, and I was fixing it slowly at the service station. That's how we met." Lucy listened silently to Katie, never once interrupting. Little Mady was sniffling in her arms, and the truth that Katie was telling her seemed unbelievable. "We had tea with him that night, talking. 2 days later, he showed up on my doorstep again, and I let him in both on the doorstep and in bed. He did not hide from me that he was married, that he did not love his wife, that he had married foolishly, and there was no turning back. Then I got pregnant, you too, and he decided to close his eyes to all these events and succumbed to the flow of life." "He loves you, doesn't he?" Lucy asked in a weak voice, fighting nausea and helplessness. She passed her daughter into Katie's arms, and the latter took her in and looked at the girl with a smile. "I don't know. He loves himself for sure, but the others, I don't know, except that he needs help now because he's alone. His mother doesn't help him much, and he needs to earn money. He called me, invited me to his, and I already knew then that you were the wife of the man I slept with, who got me pregnant and gave birth. I'm still at home with my 2 kids, just me. And John's working, keeping his mind occupied. He's worried about you. I'm going to die, I think," Lucy said quietly, and Katie nudged her in the side. "Lucio, don't be silly. It's all the medication. Your diagnosis isn't great, but it's not fatal. No matter what the doctors tell you, you'll be fine. And John will wait for you, and I'll help him. There's nothing more between us, and there can't. You're practically my friend, and I don't do anything with my friends' husbands." Katie's words made her feel better, but only temporarily and only mentally. Physically, it was not easy to bear the pain, but Lucy tried very hard. After 2 months, she was discharged from the hospital to continue her treatment in the regional center. She rented an apartment, got a job as a supermarket clerk, and called Kathy. She came with her 3 children, her eldest daughter Betty, her son, and her daughter Lucy. She also got a job, and at first there was enough money from renting out 2 apartments in her hometown for all of them. The eldest daughter babysat the children, switching from one woman to the other, but not once in their little 2-bedroom did they have any questions about John. It was as if he hadn't even been in their lives, only shared memories and the certainty that the future would be bright. He called himself, having had trouble finding Kathy and Lucy in the big city. Lucy wasn't angry with him, only regretting the time they'd spent together had been wasted. "Everything is fine, don't worry," she said. "Live your life, enjoy your freedom. I support the divorce, and then everyone will go their own way." Katie looked at Lucy talking to her husband on the phone, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Oh, what a strong woman you are," Kathy said later, as Lucy hung up the phone and looked out the window. She hugged her friend, crying with sadness and resentment. "I thought I was the only one who was strong and confident, but you turned out to be much stronger." Lucy laughed, thanking John mentally for being in her life. Thanks to him, she now had a beautiful daughter, a best friend, and the realization that there would be a white streak after the black one, and that certainty was worth much more than verbal declarations of love that no one wanted.